Suge Knight was in the car when Tupac Shakur was shot. He survived, and for 27 years, he never gave law enforcement a single name.
Why would we believe Suge Knight?
Okay.
He's a fat, lying piece of excrement. Let's be honest.
That is Tupac's biological father, Billy Garland, and he does not stop at calling Suge a liar. He goes further, placing Suge directly inside the machinery of the murder.
Maybe Keefy G worked for you. Maybe that's my feeling about that.
This is what happened when Tupac's father confronted Suge Knight over his son's murder. The confrontation. September 7th, 1996. Mike Tyson had just knocked out Bruce Seldon at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. Tupac Shakur was in the building. He and Suge Knight got into a black BMW and headed toward Club 662 for the after party. Somewhere on Flamingo Road, a white Cadillac pulled alongside them and opened fire. Tupac was shot 4 times. Suge Knight was struck by glass or metal fragments. Suge drove. He drove away from the hospital first, a fact Billy Garland later flagged as suspicious, pointing to the blown-out tires on Suge's BMW as evidence the car had gone the wrong direction before eventually reaching University Medical Center. Tupac died in that hospital 6 days later. Suge Knight walked out the same night. For 27 years, Suge Knight, the sole survivor with direct line of sight to the white Cadillac, never publicly named the shooter. Then, in September 2023, Dwayne Keefe D. Davis was arrested and charged with Tupac Shakur's murder. Keefe D had spent years making public appearances on podcasts and in a book where he admitted to being in the white Cadillac that night. His defense attorney's position to have both Tupac and Suge Knight killed, and that Keefe D had been promised that money. When news of the arrest and Keefe D's defense theory reached Suge Knight in prison, he spoke out through his Breakbeat Media podcast. He made 2 things clear. He would not testify at the trial, and he believed Keefe D should go free. Billy Garland had been watching.
Suge Knight has spoken out and was asked would he testify if he was called, and he said no.
I know.
Suge's refusal to testify was one thing, but then came the second position, and it was the one that told Billy Garland everything.
And he also said free Keefy D.
I know.
Billy Garland's response was not surprise. It was suspicion, pointed, specific suspicion.
What are your feelings behind that?
That maybe Keefy G worked for you. Maybe that's my feeling about that.
That was the confrontation in plain terms. Billy Garland, in a recorded interview with Art of Dialogue, said directly that his read of Suge Knight calling for Keefe D's release was that Keefe D may have been working for Suge Knight, not a question, a feeling stated as fact, and the refusal to testify only deepened it. If Suge Knight truly saw the shooter, there were only 2 positions a man takes. You name them, or you handle it yourself. Suge had done neither. To Billy Garland, that was not a street code position. That was something else. Suge Knight also recently spoke on his podcast about the chain-snatching incident at the MGM Grand that night, claiming that, unbeknownst to him, his head of security had instructed Tupac's bodyguard Frank Alexander to tell the press that Orlando Anderson had tried to snatch Tupac's chain when that may not have been what actually started the fight. Suge positioned this as a revelation, as if the lie had been told around him, not by him. Billy Garland was not buying the positioning.
Why would we believe Suge Knight?
Okay.
He's a fat, lying piece of excrement. Let's be honest.
That line of thinking went further than just calling Suge a liar. It pointed at a pattern. If Suge Knight's security team fabricated the story of why the fight at the MGM started, and if that fabricated story became the foundation for the Las Vegas police's understanding of the night, then the entire narrative that followed, including Orlando Anderson being blamed for the murder, was built on a lie that Suge's people created.
Where Suge got that from was from Frank Alexander. Frank Alexander did the grand jury testimony.
Okay.
And said basically that he was told to say that Orlando tried to snatch Tupac's chain.
Frank Alexander was the bodyguard present that night. He later testified before a grand jury about being told to give a false account of how the altercation started.
Who do you think told him to do that between you and I?
Well, Frank Alexander said the security did.
Frank Alexander pointed to security as the source of the instruction, but Billy Garland's question was one level up. Who told security?
So you think Frank Alexander was coerced into out of fear?
This was the confrontation on one of its most specific levels. Billy Garland calling out Suge Knight's inner circle for manufacturing the story that shaped public understanding of the night Tupac died, and then Suge Knight showing up 27 years later pretending the lie was news to him. Billy Garland's read, Suge knew. Keefe D the tool. the arrest of Dwayne. Keith D. Davis looked on the surface like a moment of justice. A man who had been publicly admitting to his role in Tupac's murder for years was finally being held to account. But Billy Garland looked at the same moment and saw something far more clinical. A government asset who had outlived his usefulness being discarded. To understand Billy Garland's position, you have to understand how Keith D came to be the face of Tupac's murder in the first place. Keith D had signed a proffer agreement years before his arrest, a legal arrangement in which he disclosed what he knew about the murder in exchange for immunity from prosecution based on what he said in that room. The government had a big PCP manufacturing case on Keith D, enough to put him away for 25 to 30 years. They offered to make it disappear if he talked about Tupac. He talked. They used that information to build the narrative that Orlando Anderson was the shooter, and Keith D walked free. He then spent years feeding that narrative in podcasts, interviews, and a book, all of it consistent with what the government needed people to believe. Billy Garland's read on Keith D was flat. This was not the mastermind of anything. This was a man being operated. Billy Garland said that the moment Keith D could not afford a lawyer after his arrest, a man who had written a book, sold his story for years, and claimed to have been promised $1 million, was all anyone needed to know about how much Keith D was actually valued by the people he'd been serving. He ended up with a public defender. There is a rich and revelatory irony carved into that detail. Keith D had spent the better part of a decade making himself the center of gravity in every conversation about Tupac's death. He talked on Vlad TV, he talked on Art of Dialogue, he talked on Camp Capone. He was seemingly everywhere, telling the same essential story, that he was in the car, that his nephew pulled the trigger, he sold a book on it. And then when the moment came to face actual legal consequences, the man who claimed to have commanded $1 million assassination could not fund his own legal defense. Billy Garland's conclusion was blunt. The people who used Keith D did not pay him enough, and when his usefulness expired, there was no safety net. According to Billy Garland, the government's decision to finally arrest Keith D had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with timing. Keith D had been protected under the proffer agreement as long as he was useful, keeping the Orlando Anderson story alive, muddying the waters around death row's involvement. But 27 years had passed. A new generation was asking questions. The pressure to show some official response to the murder was building, so the government reached back into the toolbox, pulled out Keith D, and put him in front of a judge.
So you think it's all a facade?
Yeah, until they got what they want, they got the man dead. That's all. That's the main goal.
And the night Tupac was killed, that goal announced itself before any official report did.
Mission accomplished. Because someone said on the radio, we got him.
The phrase, "they got him," broadcast on Las Vegas radio the night Tupac was shot, is a detail Billy Garland returned to more than once. It was not the language of eyewitnesses. It was the language of people waiting for a result they already knew was coming. The prosecution of Keith D, in Billy Garland's view, was the same energy in a different costume. Someone needed to be in front of a camera as the official answer to the loudest unsolved murder in hip-hop history. Keith D, loud, self-incriminating, and now without legal protection, was a ready-made defendant. He had already confessed publicly in enough formats that building a case was largely a matter of assembly. And then Suge Knight, from prison, through his podcast, said Free Keith D. Billy Garland connected those two data points immediately. A man who knows something about the murder is calling for the release of the man charged with it. That connection to Billy Garland was not coincidence. It was self-interest dressed up in solidarity.
And he also said Free Keith D.
I know.
What are your feelings behind that?
That maybe Keith D worked for you. Maybe that's my feeling about that.
Suge Knight calling Keith D free was not, in Billy Garland's reading, a man standing up for a wrongfully accused person. It was a man protecting the story that had protected him. The night and the setup. The night of September 7th, 1996 does not hold together under honest scrutiny, and Billy Garland had been applying that scrutiny for nearly 3 decades, piecing together every contradiction in the official story and laying them out one by one. Start with the weapons. Tupac Shakur was not armed that night. His security team had been told by someone within the death row structure to leave their firearms behind. This was not standard practice. This had never been standard practice. And the person who enforced that directive was Reggie White Jr., a man who Tupac had reportedly fired from his security detail before that night.
Tupac wasn't even armed that night. They didn't bring no pieces. And they told all the bodyguards to leave their pieces home, which they never did before.
Billy Garland underlined that this was not a routine instruction. Disarming the protection detail of the most visible rapper in the world on a night in Las Vegas after a high-profile fight was not a precaution. It was a configuration.
And they tell me that this boy Reggie is never away from Suge Knight. That when you saw Suge Knight, you saw Reggie.
And then there was the fact that this same man, Reggie White Jr., was, by all accounts, inseparable from Suge Knight. He was Suge's shadow. If Suge was in the room, Reggie was in the room.
They was asking me every time I came out, did he say anything? Fuck did he say he got the thing in his mouth? I didn't know what they were talking about. They want to know, did he identify whoever it was? Because obviously these two guys know what Suge Knight knows.
So the question Billy Garland kept asking was this: on the single most dangerous night in Tupac Shakur's life, why was the man who was always beside Suge Knight suddenly absent from Suge Knight's side? The answer, according to Billy Garland, was that Reggie's absence was not an accident of scheduling. It was part of the same pattern of calculated subtraction. Remove the weapons, remove the bodyguards who actually knew what they were doing, and leave Tupac exposed. Suge Knight, on his podcast, addressed the security failures of that night, but addressed them in a way that positioned himself as a victim of rogue decisions made without his knowledge. Suge claimed he had 2 of his best security personnel on Tupac that night, but the head of security pulled them off. He claimed he later sent word to Club 662 requesting 5 additional guards, and that no one came. His framing: I tried to protect Tupac. My people failed me. Billy Garland did not accept this framing. Billy Garland's position was that both Suge Knight and Keith D are liars, and that when 2 proven liars disagree about the details of what happened, neither account provides reliable information. But he was also careful to note that, among the specific lies, Reggie White Jr.'s presence in Tupac's security that night, despite being fired, was a lie by omission that only Suge Knight could explain, because Reggie was Suge's man. From the hospital, Billy Garland himself experienced how controlled the information environment around Tupac was in those final days. He arrived in Las Vegas after flying in from Newark. When he reached the hospital, he encountered 2 men at the door of Tupac's room, men who worked for Suge Knight, asking every person who came out of the room the same question.
But as far as the security for Tupac,
No, it was nothing there. Why would guys have to sit in the car? Why wouldn't you move them to a more secure area? The Las Vegas police wouldn't even come. They tried to get them to come.
This was in a hospital. Tupac was in an induced coma on a ventilator. He could not speak. He had metal staples across his torso, and Suge Knight's men were positioned at his door, asking if he had named anyone, not asking how he was doing, not asking what the doctors said, asking, did he say who did it?
it's new information.
Well, that was a fact.
I didn't know that. I mean,
they
that's
tried.
why I asked you.
Billy Garland was in the parking lot of that hospital, sitting in a car beside Tupac's window, acting as an informal guard, because there was no official protection. The Las Vegas Police Department, when contacted, declined to send even a single patrol car. The interviewer's response when Billy Garland described that police refusal: it was new because it had never been part of the story. A man is dying in a hospital bed, death threats have reportedly been called in, and the local police department will not deploy a single officer to secure the location. That detail alone changes the shape of everything that surrounded Tupac's final 6 days. Death row, the government, and the gray. There is a persistent, almost clockwork rhythm to how information about Tupac's murder has moved through public consciousness over the past 3 decades. Just as one theory calcifies into accepted truth, a new name surfaces, a new revelation, a new confession, a new piece of evidence, and the entire structure of understanding dissolves into ambiguity again. Orlando Anderson, then Keith D, then back to Suge, then forward to some unnamed government agency. The noise never resolves into signal. Billy Garland had a name for that process. He called it graying, the deliberate introduction of competing narratives, contradictory testimonies, and unsolvable layers of confusion, specifically to prevent any single version of events from achieving enough certainty to produce real accountability. It was not chaos, it was a strategy, and it was working. The clearest expression of this strategy in Billy Garland's telling was the way that Death Row Records, the LAPD, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, and various federal agencies all appeared to move in loosely coordinated ways around the investigation, each institution doing just enough to ensure the case stayed open, stayed murky, and stayed in the public eye without ever producing a clean answer. Billy Garland said he believed, without qualification and to his grave, that Death Row Records was involved in Tupac's murder. He also said the LAPD was involved, the Las Vegas justice system was involved, and various government agencies were involved. He did not treat these as separate conspiracies. He treated them as the same conspiracy expressed through different institutions. The bridge between Death Row and the government was not abstract, it was structural. Death Row Records had a federal agent embedded within its operation. According to Billy Garland, Tupac's own security team included an FBI agent named Kevin Hackey, whom Billy met the night of the shooting in Las Vegas while sharing a room at Caesar's Palace.
Yeah, we shared a room at the Caesar.
Y'all shared a room at Caesar's Palace?
We were just trying to hide. He had 2 guns. I asked him to give me one.
He didn't get one, but the significance of the encounter only revealed itself to Billy Garland months later.
Then I found out he's FBI agent. Right?
So when did you find that out? How soon did you find that out?
Months down the road.
Months down the road.
Yeah, down the road a little bit.
An FBI agent had been embedded within Tupac's circle in Las Vegas the night of the murder. He carried 2 guns. He told Billy Garland the vibe in Vegas was not good. He was nervous. And months later, Billy Garland found out who he actually was.
Okay.
That wasn't common thing. Obviously, it wasn't common death row. They had him up there for how long? But you tell me, you had somebody up there for that long and they didn't see no dirt?
This is the hole at the center of the government's position. If there was a federal agent embedded within death row records for an extended period, and that agent was present in Las Vegas the night Tupac was killed, and no charges were ever brought against death row in connection with the murder, then one of 2 things is true. Either the agent failed to gather actionable intelligence, or the intelligence he gathered was used for something other than prosecution. Suge Knight from prison had actually moved in the direction of confirming some of this. In his Breakbeat Media podcast, he admitted that Keith D had told him in person at the Staples Center during a Lakers game that they were behind what happened in Las Vegas. Suge described the conversation as happening in a bathroom. He said Keith D had told him that only half was paid and that the full arrangement had involved people on Tupac's own security team being paid to participate. Billy Garland's response to Suge making these admissions publicly was to question the motive for doing so now, after 27 years of silence.
He used to be a superstar and now he's just a no-limit soldier. What do you say to that?
And he used to be a CEO, now he's just an inmate.
That was Snoop Dogg in a separate interview describing Suge Knight's current position. The context matters. A man who ran the most powerful and feared record label in hip-hop history is now a prisoner speaking through a tablet-based podcast. His audience is gone. His power is gone. His credibility, according to Billy Garland, was never real. Billy Garland said he could not and would not take Suge Knight's recent admissions at face value, not because the details were necessarily false, but because everything Suge says is in service of something Suge needs. And what Suge needs right now is a narrative that positions him as a victim of the conspiracy rather than one of its architects. The graying is not over. Every new statement from Suge Knight adds another layer of confusion. Was it Keith D? Was it security on the inside? Was it government agencies? Was it all of them? Billy Garland's answer, probably all of them. But the thing that cannot be grayed is the fact that Suge Knight knows more than he has said and has actively chosen not to say it.
That's all it is. He just, what's all the possibilities? All you know is that he's dead.
What Tupac was becoming. The murder of Tupac Shakur is treated, in most of its public tellings, as the inevitable end of a man who lived recklessly, a cautionary arc that burned bright and collapsed under the weight of its own intensity. Billy Garland rejected that framing with something close to fury. Tupac Shakur, in the months before he died, was in the process of dismantling the identity that death row had constructed around him and rebuilding something else entirely. He was planning to leave death row. He had fired his death row attorney, David Kenner. He had fired Suge Knight's head of security, Reggie White Jr., the same man who showed up as part of his security detail the night he was killed, still wearing the badge Tupac had stripped from him. Tupac was actively working toward launching his own label, Machiavelli Records, and had privately expressed his intent to step away from music altogether and focus on film. The trajectory Billy Garland described was not toward destruction, it was toward independence, financial, creative, and political independence of a scale that the industry and certain government entities had spent decades trying to prevent from consolidating in a single black artist. According to Billy Garland, Afeni Shakur herself had told Tupac, in the months before his death, that the East Coast-West Coast beef was the same playbook as COINTELPRO, the FBI's covert program that had destroyed the Black Panthers by engineering internal division between the East and West factions. The same letters, the same manufactured hatred, the same result. Black power fractured from within, while the architects of the division watched the fire spread. When Tupac heard that from his mother, something shifted. He reached out to Nas. He began working on a collaborative project called One Nation, designed to close the wound between coasts. He was in quiet conversation with people in Biggie's circle about ending the beef. None of it happened. He was dead before any of it could. Billy Garland's position was unambiguous. The people with a stake in preventing Tupac's political evolution had a timeline, and the Las Vegas shooting was the end of it. You do not execute a man of Tupac's stature in the middle of a Mike Tyson fight in a city crawling with police, pull off a clean escape in gridlocked post-fight traffic, and have nobody see anything unless the environment has been prepared in advance. He said explicitly that it was not possible to carry out an assassination of that magnitude in Las Vegas on that night without the cooperation of law enforcement. The crowd, the traffic, the gridlock, the police directing that traffic at every corner. A white Cadillac fires multiple rounds and disappears into the night, with no footage, no witnesses who came forward, no pursuit.
So you think it's all a facade?
Yeah, until they got what they want, they got the man dead. That's all. That's the main goal.
Billy Garland did not deliver this as a theory. He delivered it as a conclusion drawn from what he saw, what he heard, and what he experienced, standing in a Las Vegas parking lot outside his son's hospital window because the police wouldn't station a car outside. Tupac had no will. When he died at 25, everything passed to Afeni. Billy Garland was listed as deceased on the death certificate, as he had been on the birth certificate, and was excluded from the estate entirely. He was not invited to Tupac's posthumous Hollywood Walk of Fame ceremony. He was not invited to the Oakland Street renaming. He was not included in the Dear Mama documentary. He sued the estate, eventually settled for $1 million, and watched as the industry that had extracted billions from his son's name and image moved on without him. The name on the street in Oakland, the star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. These are the monuments Billy Garland said the system gives to the men it kills, the consolation prizes handed to communities to absorb grief without demanding accountability. Malcolm got streets, Martin got streets, and now Tupac gets a star on concrete and a block of asphalt in the city that once beat him for jaywalking and paid him $40,000 in settlement. What Tupac was actually becoming, what his music and his politics and his intellect were building toward, none of that is on a street sign. And the people who made sure it never had the chance to fully arrive have, for 27 years, been protected by the same gray fog they created. Suge Knight sits in prison running a podcast. Keith D sat in a Nevada courtroom. The men Billy Garland believes actually orchestrated the murder have never been charged with anything, and Tupac Shakur's biological father, at 74 years old, having survived cancer and pneumonia, still watches YouTube videos trying to learn things about his son that he was never allowed to know.
Tupac's known throughout the world. His spirit, they didn't kill him. His spirit, it magnified.
And he said it knowing that the people who pulled the trigger on the spirit's body have never answered for it. Not to a court, not to a jury, and not, despite everything, to the truth.